While I distract her, you go over to her place and change the locks." Those words reached my ears like a poisonous whisper in the middle of my birthday lunch. Faith, my daughter, was leaning across the table, speaking into the ear of her husband, Grant. They thought I wouldn't hear them over the murmur of conversations and the clinking of silverware. They thought I was too distracted cutting my chocolate cake, smiling for the pictures my niece, Audrey, insisted on taking from every possible angle. But I did hear. And the most awful thing wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the casualness with which they said it, like ordering coffee or commenting on the weather. As if stripping me of my home, the only thing I had built with my own hands over 40 years, was as simple as changing the channel on the television. Grant nodded. I saw his eyes dart toward me for a fraction of a second, seeking confirmation that I hadn't noticed anything. Then he got up from the table with an excuse that I didn't even register in my mind. Something about going to the bank, about an urgent errand, about coming back soon. Faith smiled and squeezed my hand over the white tablecloth. "Mum, you're radiant today. 70 years old and you look 50. Lies wrapped in cheap flattery. I watched him walk away down the restaurant aisle, take his car keys out of his pocket, and look once more toward our table. Faith raised her glass of white wine as if in a silent toast, a code between them, a sign that everything was underway. 50 minutes, that's how long it took him to return. During that time, Faith dedicated herself to entertaining me with an almost theatrical dedication. She showed me photos on her phone of my grandchildren, even though I see them every week. She asked about my health, about whether I had renewed my prescriptions, about whether I needed help with the monthly grocery shopping. Every question was a calculated distraction, every smile a perfectly rehearsed mask. Audrey, my niece, was also at the table. She knew nothing. That was evident. She talked animatedly about her new job, about a trip she was planning to Cancun, innocent and oblivious to the drama being performed right in front of her eyes. I played along. I nodded, laughed at the appropriate moments, and sampled every dish they brought. On the outside, I was the compliant grandmother celebrating another year of life. On the inside, every second felt like an eternity, every minute a reminder that at that precise instant, someone was trying to steal everything from me. But there was something Faith didn't know, something Grant would discover very soon. When he finally returned, his face said it all. He entered the restaurant like a ghost, his skin so white it seemed to glow. His hands trembled visibly as he gripped the back of his chair. His forehead was beaded with sweat, despite the air conditioning that kept the place cool. Faith immediately stood up, alarmed. "What happened? Why did you take so long?" Grant looked at me. Then he looked at Faith. Then he looked back at me. In his eyes was something I had never seen before, genuine fear mixed with disbelief. He opened his mouth twice before the words finally came out, halting and breathless. "Something went wrong. Your mother. The house." He collapsed into the chair as if his legs had stopped supporting him. Faith leaned toward him, urgently, trying to keep her voice low so that Audrey and I wouldn't hear. But I was paying attention. Very close attention. "What do you mean something went wrong? Did you do what we agreed or not?" "I went there, Faith. I went with the locksmith you hired. But when we arrived..." He paused, running his hands over his face in a gesture of absolute despair. "The house is no longer in your mother's name. There are new owners, people who were inside, living there. They showed me the paperwork. Everything legal, all signed before a notary. The sale was made 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Faith froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. I watched as her brain processed the information, how her eyes moved frantically, trying to make sense of the impossible. Then, slowly, her gaze settled on me. I was still smiling, calm, serene. I took a sip of my sparkling water and placed the glass gently on the table. Audrey was still talking about her travel plans, completely oblivious to the silent storm that had just erupted in front of her. "Mom." Faith's voice was controlled, but I could feel the tension vibrating beneath every syllable. "You sold the house." "Yes, daughter. I sold it." There was no need to lie. There was no need to apologize. It was my house, my property, the result of 40 years of working as a nurse at General Hospital, of night shifts that ruined my back, of sacrifices she never knew, because I made sure she had everything she needed. "When? Why didn't you tell us anything?" 3 weeks ago, and I didn't have to tell you anything. I didn't need your permission. Grant remained pale, looking alternately at Faith and me, as if he were witnessing an accident in slow motion. Faith, on the other hand, began to regain colour in her face, but it wasn't the natural pink of health. It was the intense red of contained fury. "That house was our inheritance. It was the only thing you were going to leave us." "That house was mine, Faith. Mine. Not yours, not Grant's. Mine." The words came out firmer than I had planned. Audrey finally stopped talking and looked at all of us with evident confusion on her face. You could feel the eyes of the nearby tables discreetly turning toward us. "And may I ask where you plan to live now?" Faith's question dripped with sarcasm. "Or did you sell your future too?" "I have a new apartment. Smaller, more comfortable, easier to maintain, in a secure building with 24-hour security. I already moved in 2 weeks ago. And the money from the sale? It's in an investment account, well protected, generating interest that will allow me to live with dignity for the rest of my days." Faith stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Grant tried to stop her by placing a hand on her arm, but she shook him off with a harsh movement. "Do you know what you just did? Do you have any idea how you've betrayed us?" The irony of her words would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. There she was, accusing me of betrayal, when just 50 minutes earlier she had sent her husband to steal my home. "I didn't betray anyone, Faith. I protected what was mine. To understand how I got to that moment, sitting in a restaurant watching my own daughter fall apart in front of me, I need to go back 42 years. To when I was 28 and had just been widowed with a 3-year-old girl in my arms. Robert died in a construction accident. A poorly secured beam, a 5-second lapse, and my entire world collapsed. He left me with nothing but debt and a rent that was due in 2 weeks. The company's insurance took months to process, and when it finally arrived, it barely covered the funeral and the medical expenses we had accumulated during his agony in the hospital. I remember sitting on the floor of our rented room, with Faith asleep in my lap, looking at the 3 $20 bills left in my purse. $60 between us and the street. I got a job as a nurse's aide at St. Raphael General Hospital the next day. I didn't have a degree. I had barely finished high school. But the shift supervisor saw something in my eyes, desperation perhaps, or determination. She put me to work cleaning instruments and changing sheets for $5 an hour. Faith grew up in the waiting rooms of that hospital. She did her homework while I finished the night shift. She learned to read between the smell of disinfectant and the endless white hallways. By the time she was 8, she knew how to take my order from the cafeteria and carry it to the nurse's lounge without spilling a drop. I worked 16 hours a day, double shifts, triples when they offered them to me. Every extra dollar meant 1 brick closer to having something of our own. I saved the money in a cookie tin hidden under my mattress because I didn't trust banks. In 3 years, I saved $1,200. With that money, I bought a lot. A piece of land with no utilities on the outskirts of the city. So cheap that the seller laughed when I asked if the price was real. "Ma'am, there's no water or electricity there, just dirt and rocks." I didn't care. It was mine. I hired a builder who agreed to let me pay him weekly. Sunday after Sunday, I would go to see the walls of what would be our house grow. Faith would accompany me with her favorite doll, sitting on the piles of bricks while I argued with the foreman about every penny spent. It took us 4 years to finish it. 4 years of sacrifices that Faith never truly understood, because by the time we moved in, she was 12 years old and only remembered living in rented rooms. For her, the house was simply where we lived. For me, it was the result of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. I managed to connect the electricity by paying bribes that pained my soul. The water came 2 years later, when the city finally extended the pipes to our area. By then, I was already a registered nurse. I had studied at night, carrying books to the hospital, stealing hours from the sleep my body desperately needed. My salary went up from $5 an hour to $9, then to $12. At 40 years old, I was earning $15 per hour and working 60 hours a week. $900 a month that went to food, utilities, Faith's private high school because I wanted her to have what I never did. She never went hungry. She never wore second-hand clothes. She never had to choose between new notebooks or new shoes. I made sure of that, even if it meant my own shoes had holes in the soles, and my nurse's uniform was mended in places no one saw. When Faith turned 18 and announced that she was going to marry Grant, an insurance salesman she had just met, I tried to reason with her. "Wait, daughter, finish a degree first. Have something of your own before you tie yourself to someone." But she was in love, or what an 18-year-old girl thinks is love, and there was no way to convince her. I paid for the wedding. $3,000 I had saved to fix the roof of the house, which leaked every time it rained hard. But she was my only daughter, and I wanted to see her happy. So I spent every cent on a white dress, a decorated reception hall, and a meal for 120 guests. Grant turned out to be exactly what he seemed, a mediocre man with big dreams and little capacity. He sold insurance when there were clients, and when he didn't know how, which was most of the time, he lived off Faith's salary, who had gotten a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. They had 2 children, my grandchildren, whom I loved from the moment they were born. But raising 2 children on a single salary was impossible, so I helped. Always helped. $50 here, $100 there. I paid for school supplies, uniforms, doctor's visits when they got sick. Faith never said thank you. She simply held out her hand, and I filled the void with bills that represented hours of my life I would never get back. But the house was always mine. That was never in question. It was in my name, paid for with my sweat, built brick by brick with my own decisions and sacrifices. Until Robert died. Not my husband, Robert, who had been under the ground for decades. Robert's brother, my brother-in-law, who had disappeared from our lives when his brother died and only reappeared 35 years later with a lawyer and a lawsuit. He claimed that the land where I built my house had been originally bought by his father, the father-in-law I barely knew, and that technically there had never been a legal division of the inheritance between the brothers. Therefore, 50% of that property belonged to him. He appeared with yellowish papers, with stamps that looked legitimate, with a lawyer who spoke in technical words designed to confuse and frighten. He demanded that I sell the house and give him half the money, or that I pay him $50,000 for his share. $50,000 that I didn't have. I spent 2 years in court, 2 years paying a lawyer with every cent I could gather, 2 years sleeping 3 hours a night, working extra shifts to cover the legal fees that increased every month like an incurable disease. Faith, during that time, remained strangely quiet. She didn't offer financial help. She didn't ask how I was coping emotionally. She only showed up every 2 weeks to ask me about the case, about what the lawyers were saying, about the chances of me losing the house. Now I understand why she asked with such interest. The judge finally ruled in my favor. Robert's papers were clumsy forgeries. The land had been bought legally by me, with my money, without any involvement from my late husband's family. The ruling was clear. The property was 100% mine, without any debt or obligation to anyone. But the process cost me $32,000 in legal fees. It cost me 2 years of my life. It cost me my health, because I developed high blood pressure from the constant stress, and it cost me something more valuable. It cost me seeing my daughter's true nature. Because when the judge ruled, and I walked out of the courtroom crying with relief, Faith didn't hug me. She didn't celebrate with me. She looked at me with something in her eyes that took me weeks to identify. It was disappointment. Disappointment because I had won. Because the house was still mine. Because her silent plan to inherit it soon had vanished in front of a judge who recognized the truth. The months that followed the legal victory were strange. Faith began to visit me more often, but her visits had a purpose that I was slow to fully grasp. She would arrive with Grant on Sunday afternoons, always with some excuse. That the children wanted to see Grandma, that they were just passing through the neighborhood, that it had been a while since we shared a meal. But I noticed things, little details that a mother learns to detect after decades of knowing her daughter. The way her eyes scanned the rooms, how she seemed to be taking inventory of every piece of furniture. How Grant casually asked about the property value now that the neighborhood had improved. The conversation that ended abruptly when I entered the living room. One afternoon, while I was preparing coffee in the kitchen, I heard them talking on the patio. The window was ajar, and their voices came through clearly. "She's 70, Grant. She's not going to live forever." It was Faith's voice, laced with a coldness that chilled my blood. "I know, but we can't just wait for her to—" "Just wait for what? Why not? It's our legitimate inheritance. I'm an only child. All of this will eventually be ours." "Eventually doesn't work for us. The kids need a bigger house now. We need that money now. We're paying rent when we could be living here." "I already know. Believe me, I know. But I can't just ask her to give me the house. We just got out of a lawsuit where she fought like a lioness to keep it." "Then convince her to sell it and give you the money. Or put it in your name. Tell her it's to protect her from future legal problems." There was a long silence. Then Faith spoke again, and her voice was calculating, thoughtful. "It could work, but I would have to do it gradually. First, convince her to live with me for a few months, that the house is too big for her alone. Then suggest she rent it out in the meantime. And finally what? Finally, make her see that the most sensible thing is to transfer it to my name, for her own good, for her safety." I poured the coffee with trembling hands. Every word was a silent stab. It wasn't the fact that they wanted the house that hurt me. It was the manipulation, the coldness with which they were planning to disarm me piece by piece. I went out to the patio with the tray of coffee and cookies, smiling as if I hadn't heard a thing. They smiled, too, took their cups, talked about the weather and the grandchildren. Perfect actors in a play I had just discovered had been running for months. The following weeks confirmed my suspicions. Faith started making comments about how lonely I must feel in that big house. "Mum, you have 4 bedrooms and you only use 1. Don't you think that's a waste?" Grant mentioned articles he had read about elderly people suffering accidents in 2-story houses. "Stairs are dangerous at your age, Dolores. 1 fall and you could end up in the hospital." Elderly. That word began to appear frequently in their conversations. as if my 70 years had automatically turned me into someone incapable of caring for herself, as if having grey hair and wrinkles meant my brain had stopped working. One night, Faith arrived with a folder full of brochures. "Look, Mum, I've been researching senior living communities, beautiful places where you would have company, activities, nurses available 24 hours. I don't need nurses, I am a nurse. But you're getting older, and these places are wonderful. Look at this one. It has gardens, a ballroom, even yoga classes. And how much does that paradise cost? Well, it's an investment, $4,000 a month. But if you sell the house, you would have enough to... I am not selling my house to lock myself away in a luxury assisted living facility, Faith." Her face hardened for a fraction of a second before she regained her sweet, worried smile. "It's not an assisted living facility, Mum. It's a community. And I'm not saying you have to do it now. Just consider it. For your own good." For my own good. Those 4 words became the constant refrain of every conversation. Everything was for my own good. Moving in with them was for my own good. Selling the house was for my own good. Signing papers they wouldn't even let me fully read was for my own good. Grant tried another approach. He started talking to me about investments, about how money kept in a house didn't generate interest. You could sell, invest the money, and live off the rent it would generate. $600, $700 a month for doing nothing. I already have my pension from the hospital, $1,200 monthly. It's enough. But with more money you could travel, treat yourself, enjoy your old age. Old age. Another word that started appearing too often, always loaded with implications of incapability, of needing supervision, of dependence. But what truly opened my eyes was a conversation I overheard by chance 3 months before my birthday. I had gone to drop off a sweater I had knitted for my youngest grandson at Faith's house. I rang the bell, but no one answered, even though Grant's car was in the driveway. The door was ajar, so I went in, calling out for them. Their voices came from the study. They were talking on the phone, on speakerphone, with someone who had a professional, cold tone. "So what you're suggesting is that we wait for her to have a temporary health issue that incapacitates her." It was the voice of an older man, probably a lawyer. "Exactly, Bill," Grant responded. "An accident, a hospitalization, something that justifies her needing help managing her affairs. And at that moment, you would request temporary guardianship, presenting evidence that the lady cannot make decisions on her own." "But is that legal?" Faith asked. "I mean, she's perfectly fine now, clear-headed, independent." "That's why I said temporarily. A judge could grant you guardianship for 6 months, renewable depending on your mother's health status. During that time, you would have legal power to sell properties, manage bank accounts, make medical decisions, and if she objects. If you can demonstrate that she is not in a condition to object rationally, her objection would carry no legal weight. You would need psychological evaluations, testimonies from neighbors about erratic behavior, that kind of thing. Erratic behavior that we could suggest," Grant said slowly. "I didn't suggest any of that. But let's say that if several neighbors reported concerns about forgetfulness, confusion, personal neglect, that would strengthen your case. And what would your fees be? $5,000 up front, another $5,000 when guardianship is granted, $10,000 in total, which you would easily recover with the sale of the property." I left that house without making a sound, the sweater still in my hands and my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I walked the 4 blocks to my house, because I didn't trust my legs to drive. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, looking at the walls I had seen built brick by brick, thinking about every sacrifice I had made to get there, and thinking about how my own daughter was planning to take everything away from me, using the same laws that were supposedly meant to protect me. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I started planning. The next day, I hired a different lawyer. I didn't tell him about the conversation I had overheard. I simply told him I needed to protect my assets from possible future conflicts. He recommended several options: a trust, a sale with lifetime usufruct, or simply selling and reinvesting the money into something more liquid and protected. I chose to sell. The decision to sell wasn't easy, but it was necessary. That house represented my entire adult life. Every corner held memories that hurt to touch. The paint stain on the hallway wall where Faith had tried to draw butterflies at 6 years old. The mark on the kitchen door frame where I measured her height every birthday until she turned 15 and refused to continue that childish tradition. The garden I had cultivated with my own hands, where the roses Robert loved before he died grew. But memories don't pay corrupt lawyers. Feelings don't stop ambitious daughters. I hired a real estate agent whom a co-worker at the hospital recommended to me. Her name was Emily Johnson, a woman about 50 years old with shrewd eyes and a direct way of speaking that I liked immediately. Mrs. Thompson, this property is worth between $180,000 and $200,000 in the current market. The neighborhood has improved a lot in recent years. I can get you a good price. I need it to be fast and discreet. Emily looked at me with that expression women who have seen enough of the world have, to not ask unnecessary questions. I understand. Family issues. You could say that. I've seen it before. Children who suddenly become very interested in their parents' well-being when they smell an inheritance. Don't worry, I can have this sold in 3 weeks if you accept a fair price. How much? $185,000. There's a young couple looking in this area. They have the money ready. They just need to find the right house. Yours fits perfectly. 3 weeks. That was the time I had to dismantle 40 years of my life and start over. To pack every object, every photograph, every piece of my history into boxes that would go to a place I didn't even know yet. Do it. We signed the papers that same afternoon. Emily explained every clause, every legal term, making sure I understood exactly what I was doing. The sale would be in cash, without financing, which meant it could close in less than a month once we found the right buyer. And where do you plan to move? She asked as she put the documents in her briefcase. I don't know yet. I need to find something small, safe, where no one knows where I am. I know a building downtown, apartments for seniors, but it's not assisted living. They're independent apartments with 24-hour security, cameras, a doorman. A lot of retired nurses live there. I could get you a 1-bedroom for $900 a month. I can see it today. We went that same afternoon. The building was modern, 6 stories high, with a clean facade and a small but well-maintained garden at the entrance. The doorman greeted Emily by name. Clearly, she had brought clients before. The apartment on the 3rd floor was empty and smelled of fresh paint. A small living room with a window facing the street, an integrated kitchen with new appliances, a bedroom large enough for my bed and a closet, and a full bathroom with grab bars already installed. It's perfect. You don't want to think about it? There's nothing to think about. I'll take it. I signed the lease that same day, paying 3 months in advance with the money I had saved. $2,700 that hurt to take out of my account, but it was an investment in my freedom. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was still the Dolores that Faith knew, the available mother, the compliant grandmother, the older woman who supposedly needed help with everything. At night, I packed in secret. Clothes, important documents, photographs, the few objects of sentimental value that I couldn't leave behind. Faith continued to visit me, each time more frequently. Always with Grant, always with that expression of concern that I now recognized as completely false. They brought me food I hadn't asked for, offered to make repairs to the house that weren't needed, and constantly asked about my health. "Mum, you look tired. Are you sleeping well?" "Perfectly, daughter." "It's just that you seem distracted lately. Yesterday you called me and said the same thing twice." "Did I really? I don't remember." I was lying. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was creating her narrative, documenting symptoms they would later use against me. Every visit was a mental record of supposed forgetfulness, confusion, signs of cognitive decline that existed only in her convenient imagination. Grant took photographs. He thought I didn't realize it, but I saw him take out his phone and capture images of the inside of the house, the furniture, the rooms, everything they would later claim as part of the family inheritance that must be preserved. 2 days before the sale closed, Faith arrived with a proposal. "Mum, Grant and I have been thinking. How would you feel about coming to live with us for a few months, just to try it out? You could stay in the guest room. You'd have company. You wouldn't have to worry about the house." "And what would happen to this house in the meantime?" "We could rent it out. Get some extra income that would be good for you. I would take care of finding reliable tenants, collecting the rent, everything. You would just have to enjoy being with your family." It was so obvious it hurt. Once I was living with them, once the house was rented out in Faith's name, it would be a matter of time before they found a way to take it from me permanently. A signed paper here, a supposed medical emergency there, and I would lose everything without even realizing it until it was too late. "Let me think about it." "There's not much to think about, Mum. It's for your own good." There it was again. For my own good. As if I were incapable of knowing what was best for myself. "Give me a week." "A week, then. But think about it seriously. You shouldn't be living alone anymore, Mum. At your age, anything can happen." They left that night, and I finished packing. Boxes and more boxes of an entire life reduced to cardboard and adhesive tape. I hired a small moving company, one of those that don't ask questions and work for cash. I paid them $300 to move everything to the new apartment on a day when I knew Faith would be working. The sale closed on a Tuesday afternoon at the notary's office. The buying couple, Claudio and Brenda Martinez, were exactly what Emily had promised. Young professionals with a baby on the way, looking for their first home. Their eyes were bright with the start of something new, the same hope I had had 40 years ago when I bought that empty lot. "We will take very good care of your house, Mrs. Thompson," Brenda said with genuine sincerity. "We can feel all the love in every corner." I almost cried. Almost. But I held firm, smiled, and signed every paper the notary put in front of me. The bank transfer arrived in my account while we were still in the office. $185,000. Minus Emily's fees, minus the closing costs, I was left with $172,000 clear. "What do you plan to do with the money?" the notary asked as he sealed the final documents. "Invest it in something that will give me peace." That same afternoon, I opened 3 different accounts. A long-term investment account that would generate modest but secure interest. An emergency savings account with $50,000 that no one could touch without my personal and physical authorization at the bank. And a normal checking account for my monthly expenses. Everything under my name only. No beneficiaries, no co-signers, no way for anyone else to access that money, even if I were declared incapacitated. The lawyer I hired made sure every account was protected with specific instructions. In case of illness or incapacity, the bank had to contact my lawyer directly, not any family member. Any attempt at guardianship or power of attorney would have to go through him first, and he had strict instructions to fight every request as if his life depended on it. It cost me another $2,000 in legal fees, but it was worth every cent. The move to the new apartment was almost anticlimactic. My belongings occupied barely half of the available space. I realized how much unnecessary weight I had been carrying all these years. Furniture I never used, clothes I hadn't worn in decades, decorative objects that only collected dust. My new life in the apartment began with a silence I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the empty silence of loneliness, but the silence filled with possibilities. Every morning I woke up knowing that this space was completely mine, that no one would come to comment on how I decorated it or to suggest it was too big for me. But I knew the silence wouldn't last. Faith would eventually notice something, and I had to be prepared for that moment. During the first week in my new home, I established a routine. I had breakfast at the small table by the window, watching the city wake up. I went for a walk in the nearby park every morning, meeting other women my age who had also chosen to live independently. In the afternoons, I read or watched television without the constant pressure of wondering when the doorbell would ring with another casual visit from my daughter. I had given my new phone number only to my lawyer and Emily. I kept my old phone active, but I left it in the nightstand drawer, checking it only once a day for Faith's messages. They were predictable in their falseness. "Mum, I stopped by your place today, but you weren't there. Where are you?" "Mum, I need to talk to you about what we discussed. When can I visit you?" "Mum, I'm worried. You're not answering my calls. Are you okay?" I didn't answer immediately. I waited a few hours, sometimes an entire day, before sending short, vague replies. "I'm fine, daughter. Busy with some personal matters." Nothing that gave her real information, nothing that allowed her to track what I was really doing. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Faith began to get impatient. Her messages became more insistent, more demanding. "Mum, I need to see you. It's urgent. We have to talk about your future." My future. As if she had any right to decide about it. It was Grant who finally showed up at the house, or what had been my house. Claudio Martinez called me one afternoon, confused and slightly alarmed. "Mrs. Thompson, there's a man here who says he's your son-in-law. He's demanding to come in. He says he needs to pick up some of your things." I explained that the house is no longer yours, that we bought the property legally, but he insists there must be a mistake. "There is no mistake, Mr. Martinez. The house is completely yours now. My son-in-law has no right to it, or to anything inside. If he continues to bother you, call the police." "Are you sure? He seems very upset." "Completely sure. Mr. Martinez, it is possible that in the coming weeks more people will appear making similar claims. Please do not let them in. All the sale documents are in order. You have nothing to worry about." I hung up and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea with perfectly steady hands. So they had finally found out. I wondered how long it would take them to find me. The answer was less than 2 hours. My old phone began to ring non-stop. Call after call from Faith, from Grant, even from unknown numbers that I assumed were from friends or relatives they had recruited to their cause. I didn't answer any. I just sat in my new armchair, sipping my tea, waiting. The voicemails started piling up. I listened to them that night, one by one, like someone listening to a particularly bad play. "Mum, what did you do? Did you sell the house? Without telling us anything? How could you do something like that?" Faith's voice swung between disbelief and poorly contained fury. "Dolores, we need to talk urgently. This is very serious. You've made a terrible mistake." Grant tried to sound authoritative, but only managed to sound desperate. "Mum, please, answer. We are very worried. Where are you living now?" Why didn't you tell us you were going to sell? We had plans. We had talked about your future. Faith again, now trying the concerned daughter approach. The last message was the most revealing. Faith had stopped pretending. You know what, Mum? This is not going to stand. That house was our inheritance. We worked for that. We took care of you, expecting you to be fair to us. You can't just sell it and keep all the money. We are going to fight this legally. Grant has already spoken to a lawyer. We have rights. Rights. What an interesting word, coming from someone who had planned to strip me of mine. I deleted all the messages and turned off the phone. I wouldn't need it anymore. The next day, Faith showed up at the hospital where I had worked for 40 years. She asked for me at Human Resources. She demanded to know if I had any updated contact information in my files. The shift supervisor, who knew me well, politely explained that that information was confidential and that if I hadn't shared my address with her, the hospital couldn't do it. She's my mother. She's 70 years old. She sold her house and no one knows where she is. She could be in danger. Faith had perfected her distressed daughter tone. Your mother worked here for 40 years. I know her personally. She is one of the most capable and intelligent women I have ever met. If she decided not to share her location with you, I am sure she has her reasons. The supervisor didn't let herself be manipulated. I found out about this conversation because the supervisor called me that same afternoon on my new number, laughing. Dolores, your daughter came in today making a scene. Is everything all right? Do you need help? Everything is perfectly fine, Hortense. Just a daughter who can't accept that her mother still has the right to make her own decisions. Ah, one of those. I had a similar one. They wanted to put me in assisted living to get my house. I showed them I can still run faster than they can. She laughed with that deep laugh I had always liked. If you need anything at all, call me. I will. Thank you, Hortense. But Faith and Grant didn't give up. They started looking for me systematically. They went to all the places they knew I used to go. The neighborhood church, the supermarket where I had shopped for years, the house of Audrey, my niece. Audrey called me, concerned. Aunt Dolores, Faith was here. She says you sold your house and disappeared, that she's very worried about you. What is going on? I'm fine, Audrey. I just made some decisions about my life that Faith didn't like. But they are my decisions to make. You sold the house? Yes. And you are living alone somewhere? I am living very well, in a safe place, with my money protected and my peace of mind intact. There was a silence. Then Audrey sighed. Faith asked me that if I saw you, I should try to convince you to move in with them. She said something about it not being safe for you to be alone at your age. And what do you think? I think you are the strongest woman I know, and that if you made this decision, it was for a good reason. But I also think Faith is really upset. She says you are going to fight this legally. Let her. She has no legal basis. Aunt, what really happened? Faith has always been complicated, I know, but this seems more serious. I told her. Not everything, but enough. The conversation I had overheard about guardianship, the plans to manipulate me, the corrupt lawyer willing to help them strip me of my autonomy and my assets. Audrey was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with a mixture of rage and sadness. I can't believe she's capable of that. She's your daughter. Precisely why it hurts so much. What are you going to do now? Nothing. I already did what I had to do. I protected my assets, secured my independence, and now I'm going to live the rest of my life in peace. What Faith does or doesn't do is no longer my problem. But I knew Faith wouldn't give up that easily. I knew her too well. When she wanted something, she wouldn't stop until she got it, or until reality hit her hard enough to make her desist, and we hadn't reached that point yet. 3 weeks of relative silence passed. She didn't try to contact me directly. She didn't show up at the places where she used to see me. That silence made me more nervous than all her calls put together. It meant she was planning something, regrouping, preparing her next move. My lawyer called me one Friday afternoon. "Mrs. Thompson, I received a notification. Your daughter filed a court petition alleging concern for your mental well-being and your capacity to manage your financial affairs." There it was. Exactly what I had heard in that conversation months ago. The plan was still on track, only now I no longer had anything they could take. What does she specifically allege? That you sold your property impulsively and without consulting your family. That you have shown signs of confusion and cognitive decline. That you have socially isolated yourself and are not responding to communication attempts from your only daughter. She requests a mandatory psychological evaluation and a hearing to determine if you need temporary guardianship. How serious is this? It depends on the judge. Some take these requests very seriously, especially when they come from direct family members. Others are more skeptical. We will need to prepare a solid defense. Do you have any evidence that you are in full mental capacity? I have 40 years of employment history as a professional nurse. I have retirement records that show I handled all the paperwork myself. I have the entire process of the sale of my house, where I signed every document with full awareness and with the advice of professionals. Good. That helps. But we will also need an independent psychological evaluation that demonstrates your cognitive capacity, and it would be useful to have witnesses who can speak about your current mental state. When is the hearing? In 3 weeks. But before that, the judge ordered a visit from a social worker to your current residence to assess your living conditions. Of course. They wanted to see where I lived, how I lived, to look for any evidence of personal neglect or inability to care for myself. It was part of the strategy I had heard months ago. Faith knows where I live. Not according to the documents she presented. She alleges that she has no knowledge of your current whereabouts, which she uses as additional evidence of your supposed mental decline. She says a person in their right mind would not disappear without leaving an address for their only family. How convenient. Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you something important. Is there any possibility that your daughter is right? Any moment of real confusion? Any significant forgetfulness? Anything she could use against you? I'm 70 years old, not 30. Sometimes I forget where I left my glasses or what I was going to buy at the supermarket. But my mind is perfectly clear. I sold my house because I discovered my daughter planned to steal it from me. I moved without telling her because I don't trust her. Those are not the actions of a confused person. They are the actions of a person protecting herself. Then that is exactly what we will say at the hearing. The psychological evaluation was 3 days later. Dr. Francis Williams was a forensic psychiatrist with 30 years of experience evaluating mental capacity in legal cases. He gave me tests for memory, logical reasoning, and temporal and spatial orientation. He asked me to solve math problems, recall lists of words, and explain the meaning of common sayings. Mrs. Thompson, your results are well above average for your age. There is no evidence of cognitive decline, dementia, or mental incapacity of any kind. Your short-term and long-term memory work perfectly. Your reasoning ability is excellent. From a clinical point of view, you are completely capable of managing your own affairs. Can you put that in writing? I already have. My report will be available to the judge before the hearing. The social worker arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday morning. She was a young woman, probably about 35 years old, with a tablet in her hand and a professionally neutral expression. "Mrs. Thompson, I am Emily Miller, social worker assigned by the court. I need to ask you some questions and observe your current living conditions. Please, come in. She toured the apartment slowly, taking notes. She checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom. She opened the refrigerator and saw that it was well stocked with fresh food. She checked the medicine cabinet and saw my medications were organized and current. She observed that the apartment was clean, organized, and tastefully decorated. You live alone here? Yes. Who helps you with shopping, cleaning, food preparation? No one. I do it myself. Do you have any difficulty performing these tasks? None. I was a nurse for 40 years. I know how to take care of myself perfectly. Why did you move from your previous home? Because I discovered that my daughter planned to take it from me using questionable legal means. I sold the property to protect my assets and moved here to have peace. Emily looked up from her tablet, her eyes showing genuine interest for the first time. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. I overheard a conversation between my daughter, her husband, and a lawyer discussing how to obtain guardianship over me based on supposed mental problems that I do not have. I took preventative measures. Do you have any evidence of that conversation? My word. And the fact that they are now doing exactly what they planned to do, requesting guardianship based on false allegations of incapacity. Emily wrote for several minutes. Then she asked me more questions. About my daily routine, my social activities, my physical health, my finances. I showed her my bank statements, my rent payment receipts, my updated medical records. Mrs. Thompson, I have to tell you that I have evaluated dozens of cases like this. Most are genuine situations where an older person needs help, but some— She paused. Some are family members trying to take control of assets before it is legally appropriate. And what do you think my case is? I believe you are perfectly capable of living independently and managing your own affairs. My report will reflect that. 2 weeks later came the date of my 70th birthday. I hadn't planned to celebrate it. The idea of partying while facing a legal battle with my own daughter seemed absurd. But Audrey insisted. Aunt, you can't let Faith steal your birthday too. We'll have a small lunch. Just the two of us if you want. But you have to celebrate making it to 70 and still being the owner of your own life. She was right. So I accepted. But with one condition. I would choose the restaurant and only give her the address that morning. I didn't want to risk Audrey, without meaning to, saying something to Faith. I chose a small restaurant downtown, near my apartment. A cozy place where the food was good and the atmosphere was quiet. I arrived early and asked for a table near the window. Audrey arrived on time, with a small chocolate cake and a sincere hug. Happy birthday, Aunt. 70 years of being the strongest woman I know. We ordered food, chatted about her life, and her travel plans that had finally come together. It was nice to have a normal conversation, without tension, without hidden agendas. We were about to order coffee when I saw something that chilled my blood. Faith walked into the restaurant with Grant. It wasn't a coincidence. The way Faith scanned the restaurant with her eyes, the way Grant walked half a step behind her, the determined expression on her face. They had come looking for me, and somehow they had found out where I would be. My gaze locked on Audrey, who instantly paled. Aunt, I didn't. She called me this morning and asked if I knew anything about you. I told her no, but— Her voice broke. She checked my phone. She must have done it while I was in the bathroom at her house yesterday. She saw your messages. I am so sorry. I didn't have time to respond. Faith had already reached our table. Mom, what a surprise to find you here. Her voice dripped sarcasm. Celebrating your birthday with Audrey, but not with your own daughter. I'm not surprised you came uninvited. It seems to be your specialty lately. Grant pulled a chair from the next table, and both sat down without waiting for permission. Audrey looked at me with pleading eyes, clearly uncomfortable but unsure how to handle the situation. We need to talk, Mum, about many things. Faith placed her purse on the table like someone marking territory. We have nothing to talk about. Oh no! How about how you sold the family house without telling us anything? How about how you disappeared for weeks without explanation? How about the fact that you are acting completely irrational? Irrational, I repeated the word slowly. How interesting that you use exactly the same terminology your lawyer used in the documents you presented to the judge. Her face tensed for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. I filed those documents because I am genuinely worried about you. Any daughter would. Any daughter who wanted to steal from her mother, you mean? Audrey gasped. Grant shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Faith, however, kept her gaze fixed on me. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. I know about the lawyer you spoke with. I know about the plan to obtain guardianship over me. I know you planned to have me declared incompetent to take control of my assets. The only thing you didn't know is that I found out before you could execute it. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. The diners at nearby tables had stopped talking and were looking at us discreetly. The waiter who was coming toward us with the coffee quietly turned back. You're paranoid, Faith finally said. That's exactly the kind of thinking that shows you need help. Imagining conspiracies. Believing your own family wants to hurt you. It's not paranoia when it's true, and I didn't have to imagine it. I heard it directly from your mouth. Grant intervened for the first time. Dolores, I understand you're upset, but you need to see this from our perspective. You sold a property worth almost $200,000 without consulting anyone. You moved without leaving an address. You don't answer calls. These are worrying behaviors in someone your age. Worrying behaviors? It was my house, bought with my money, built with my work. I didn't need to consult anyone to sell it. And I moved without leaving an address, precisely because I knew you would come to do this, to manipulate me, to pressure me, to try to control me. No one wants to control you, Mum. Faith had switched to her sweet voice, the one she used when she was trying to convince me of something. We just want what's best for you. You're our mother. We love you. If you loved me, you would respect my decisions. If you loved me, you wouldn't have hired a lawyer to plan how to strip me of my autonomy. That's your version of events. A version distorted by... Faith searched for the right words. By your age, by the stress of living alone, by the natural confusion that comes with aging. There it was again. The carefully constructed narrative. Every word chosen to paint a picture of a confused old woman, not an intelligent woman protecting what was hers. I'm not confused, Faith. I'm clearer-headed than I've been in years, and what I see clearly is that you planned to steal everything from me under the pretense of taking care of me. No one was going to steal anything from you. Faith's voice rose in volume. Several heads turned openly toward us. That house was your inheritance for us, for your family. You sold it and kept all the money. And there was the truth, finally undisguised. It was my money, Faith, not your inheritance. Not until I die, and apparently that couldn't wait. Don't say that. That's horrible. Horrible? Do you know what's horrible? Having your own daughter spy on you, plan to declare you incompetent, and hire corrupt lawyers to strip you of everything you worked 40 years to achieve. That is horrible. Grant leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. Look, Dolores, let's be practical. You sold the house, fine. But that money is too much for a person your age to manage alone. You could be scammed. You could make bad investments. You could lose everything. Let us help you manage it. We can open a joint account. I can advise you on the investments. We'll make sure you're secure. Secure for whom? For me or for you? For everyone. We're family. Family doesn't plan to betray each other. Faith slammed her palm on the table, making the silverware clatter. Enough. This is ridiculous. Mum, you're coming with us right now. We'll go to your apartment, you'll pick up your things, and you'll come live with us where we can properly care for you. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. And I'm telling you that you have no right over me. I am an adult woman, in full mental capacity, and I make my own decisions. The hearing is in 5 days, Grant said. The judge is going to hear all the evidence we have. The neighbours from your old house who reported seeing you disoriented. The hospital staff who noticed changes in your behaviour before you retired. Everything is documented. Lies. Every word was a carefully planted lie. Testimonies they had probably fabricated or manipulated to build their case. Let them present what they want. I have my own evidence. Psychological evaluations that demonstrate my complete mental capacity. Social worker reports that confirm I live independently without problems. And above all, I have the truth. The truth, Faith laughed bitterly. Your truth is that you're stubborn, headstrong, refusing to accept that you need help. That's not the truth, Mum. That's your ego, refusing to admit you can't do everything alone anymore. I stood up. Audrey did the same immediately, standing beside me in a gesture of silent support. I have been doing things alone for 70 years, Faith. I raised a daughter alone after your father died. I built a house alone. I made my way in a profession alone. And I am going to end my days alone. And that means keeping my dignity intact. Mum, please. For the first time, Faith's voice trembled with something that might have been genuine emotion. Or maybe it was just frustration that her plan had fallen apart. It doesn't have to be this way. We can fix this. We can... You can what? Can you stop trying to control me? Can you respect that I am the owner of my own life? No, Faith. You can't. Because you never saw me as a person with the right to decide. You only saw me as a source of resources you would eventually inherit. I took out my wallet and left 3 $20 bills on the table, enough to cover Audrey's and my bill with a generous tip. Happy birthday to me, I said without emotion. Audrey, let's go. This isn't over, Dolores. Grant stood up too. We're going to fight this all the way. Do it. But let me tell you something. While you were planning how to steal from me, I had already protected myself. The money is invested in accounts you can't touch. My apartment is in the name of a corporation of which I am the sole beneficiary. And I have clear legal instructions on what to do if you try to declare me incompetent. That sounds like paranoia, Mum. You don't see it. It sounds like intelligence, daughter. Something you clearly underestimated in me. We left the restaurant under the gaze of everyone present. The 5 days until the hearing were the longest of my life. Not out of fear, but out of the anticipation of finally being able to tell my truth in front of someone with the authority to make Faith and Grant understand that they had lost. My lawyer, Dr. Chris Miller, prepared me exhaustively. We went over every detail of my case, every document, every piece of evidence. He taught me to remain calm, no matter what accusations they made, to respond clearly and precisely, and not to let myself be emotionally provoked. They are going to try to paint you as a confused and stubborn old woman, he warned me. Their strategy depends on making the judge see you as someone incapable of making rational decisions. You have to prove the exact opposite with every word you say. It won't be difficult. I just have to be myself. Exactly. Be yourself. The woman who built a life from scratch, who worked 40 years as a nurse, who made intelligent decisions to protect her assets. That is the woman the judge needs to see. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. A grey suit I had bought especially for the occasion, discreet but elegant, comfortable but formal shoes, light makeup that highlighted my face without exaggeration. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a 70-year-old woman in full control of her faculties. I arrived at the courthouse half an hour before the scheduled time. Dr. Miller was already there, reviewing documents in his briefcase. He greeted me with a reassuring smile. Ready? More than ready. Faith and Grant arrived 15 minutes later with their lawyer, a man about 50 years old, with an expensive suit and a shark-like expression. His name was Harvey Black, according to his identification badge. They didn't look at me directly, but I could feel their eyes assessing me, looking for any sign of weakness they could exploit. The courtroom was small, formal, with dark wood paneling and the smell of old paper. The judge entered promptly, a man about 60 with grey hair and thick glasses. He introduced himself as Judge Robert Smith. Good morning. We are here to evaluate the petition for temporary guardianship filed by Ms. Faith Thompson over her mother, Mrs. Dolores Thompson. We will proceed with the testimonies. Attorney Black, you may begin. Harvey Black stood up and began his presentation in a firm, authoritative voice. Your Honor, we are here because a concerned daughter has noticed alarming changes in her mother's behavior. Mrs. Dolores Thompson, 70 years old, has made impulsive and irrational financial decisions that put her future well-being at risk. She sold her family property, valued at nearly $200,000, without consulting her only family. She moved without leaving a contact address. She has cut off communication with her daughter. These are behaviors that suggest cognitive decline and a need for supervision. I remained seated, calm, my hands in my lap. Dr. Miller had warned me this would be their approach. Let them speak first, let them show their hand, before presenting our defense. We have testimonies from neighbors who reported erratic behavior. Mrs. Thompson was seen wandering her neighborhood at odd hours. She seemed confused about what day it was, forgot conversations she had had days before. Lies. All lies. But said with such conviction that someone who didn't know me might believe them. Furthermore, Your Honor, social isolation is a classic symptom of mental decline in elderly people. Mrs. Thompson has rejected all attempts by her family to help her, to maintain contact, even to know where she lives. This rejection of family support is deeply concerning. The judge listened intently, taking occasional notes. His expression was neutral, impossible to read. We request that temporary guardianship be granted to my client to protect her mother's interests. It is not about controlling her, but about ensuring that the decisions she makes are in her best interest and are supervised by someone who loves and cares for her. When he finished, the judge turned to Dr. Miller. Defense. My lawyer stood up calmly without rushing. Your Honor, what we have heard is a carefully constructed narrative to justify the control of a perfectly capable woman's assets. My client is not a confused old woman. She is a retired professional with 40 years of experience as a nurse, with an impeccable history of managing her own affairs and with completely intact mental capacity. He placed several documents on the judge's table. Here we have the psychological evaluation from Dr. Francis Williams, a certified forensic psychiatrist. The results show that Mrs. Thompson has cognitive capacity far above average for her age. There is no sign of dementia, mental decline, or inability to make decisions. The judge reviewed the documents carefully. We also have the report from social worker Emily Miller, who visited my client's current residence and found her living completely independently in optimal conditions. Her apartment is clean, organized, well-maintained. She manages her own finances, her own nutrition, and her own personal care without any difficulty. Dr. Miller paused, letting the information sink in. The truth, Your Honor, is that Mrs. Thompson discovered her daughter planned to gain control of her assets using the exact mechanism we are seeing today. A petition for guardianship based on false allegations of incapacity. She took intelligent and completely rational preventative measures to protect what is rightfully hers. That is absurd, interrupted Harvey Black. My client would never— The judge raised his hand. Let him finish, counsel. Thank you, Your Honor. My client is willing to testify under oath about what she overheard, but beyond that, the facts speak for themselves. A woman who can plan and execute the sale of a property, who can research and move to an appropriate new residence, who can manage complex financial investments, is not a woman who needs guardianship. She is a woman who needs her family to respect her autonomy. The judge looked directly at me for the first time. Mrs. Thompson, I would like to hear from you. Can you explain to me in your own words why you sold your house? I stood up. My voice came out firm, clear, without trembling. I sold it, Your Honor, because I heard my daughter and her husband planning exactly this. I heard a conversation where they discussed with a lawyer how to obtain guardianship over me, how to fabricate evidence of mental incapacity, how to take control of my property. I wasn't going to wait for them to execute that plan, so I protected myself. That is a lie, Faith stood up. Mum, how can you say that? We would never do something like that. Silence, the judge spoke with authority. Mrs. Thompson, sit down. Mrs. Thompson Sr., continue. I worked 40 years as a nurse at St. Raphael General Hospital. I raised my daughter alone after being widowed. I bought a lot and built my house with my own money, brick by brick. I defended that property in a lawsuit that cost me 2 years and $32,000. I am not a woman who makes impulsive decisions, Your Honor. Every decision I have made in my life has been calculated and thought out. And your daughter? Do you not believe she could be genuinely concerned about you? If she were genuinely concerned, she would have respected my decision to sell. She would have asked how she could help me with the move. She would have celebrated that I secured my financial future. Instead, she hired a lawyer and filed a guardianship petition. Those are not the actions of a concerned daughter, Your Honor. They are the actions of someone furious because she lost access to an inheritance she believed was hers. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge studied me for a long moment. Attorney Black, do you have concrete evidence of the mental decline you allege? Medical evaluations, documented reports, anything beyond anecdotal testimonies? Harvey Black hesitated for the first time. Your Honor, we have the testimonies of neighbors who saw her confused. Do you have sworn declarations from those neighbors? Verifiable names and contacts? Are we in the process of— or are they testimonies your client related to you second-hand? Your Honor, is it common in these cases that— Answer the question, counsel. Do you have verifiable declarations or not? Not at this moment, Your Honor, but we can obtain them if given time. The judge closed the folder in front of him with a dry thud. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking alternately at Faith and me. Then he spoke in a voice that left no room for interpretation. I have reviewed all the documentation presented. The psychological evaluation of Mrs. Dolores Thompson shows complete mental capacity. The social worker's report confirms that she lives independently without problems. Her financial records demonstrate that she manages her affairs responsibly. I see no concrete evidence to justify guardianship, not even temporary. Faith paled. Grant gripped the edge of the table. What I do see, the judge continued, is a 70-year-old woman who made intelligent decisions to protect her assets from what she perceived as a threat. Whether that perception is correct or not, the fact is that she had every legal right to sell her property, move wherever she wanted, and manage her money as she saw fit. She did not need anyone's permission. The judge looked directly at Faith. Ms. Thompson, I understand you may be concerned about your mother, but concern is not a legal basis for removing the autonomy of a competent person. Your mother has demonstrated she is in full command of her faculties. This petition for guardianship is denied. The bang of the gavel resonated in the room like a final thunderclap. Case closed. You may withdraw. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. Faith and Grant remained in their seats, motionless, like statues observing a world that had crumbled around them. I didn't turn to look at them. I had nothing more to say. On the street, Dr. Miller shook my hand with a genuine smile. You did perfectly, Mrs. Thompson. It couldn't have gone better. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. What will you do now? Live. Simply live. And that was exactly what I did. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Faith tried to contact me 3 more times during the first month after the hearing. Text messages that oscillated between pleas and accusations. I ignored them all. Eventually, she stopped trying. Audrey visited me every 2 weeks. She told me that Faith and Grant had had to move to a smaller apartment because they couldn't afford the rent of their previous house, that the children asked about me, but Faith told them that Grandma was sick and couldn't have visitors. Another lie in her collection. Doesn't it make you sad, Aunt? They're your grandchildren. It makes me sad that they are being raised by someone who values money more than family, but I can't save them from that. I can only save myself. My life in the apartment became a comfortable, predictable routine. I woke up early. I drank coffee watching the sunrise over the city. I went for walks in the park where I had made friends. Other women my age who had also chosen independence over the false comfort of depending on their children. One of them, Brenda Williams, told me her own story one afternoon while we were having tea in my apartment. Her son had tried to put her in assisted living to take her house. She had fought legally, won, and now lived in the same building as me, 3 floors up. Our children grew up in a time when everything was easy for them, she told me. They don't understand the value of sacrifice because they never had to make any. And when they see that we have something they don't think about working to get it. They think about how to take it from us. She was right. We had worked so hard to give them a better life that we forgot to teach them to value the effort behind everything. With the money from the sale of my house, after paying all the legal expenses and establishing my investments, I was left with $155,000 well protected. The interest generated approximately $600 monthly, which, added to my pension of $1,200, gave me $1,800 a month. More than enough to live comfortably. I signed up for painting classes at the community center. I discovered I had a talent for landscapes, especially for capturing the light of the sunset over the mountains that surrounded the city. My paintings began to decorate the walls of my apartment, replacing old photographs of a family that no longer existed in the way I had imagined. 1 year after the hearing, I received a letter. It was from Faith. The handwriting was the same I had known since she learned to write as a child, but the words were from a woman I no longer recognized. Mum, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that happened, but Grant and I are going through serious financial difficulties. The children need school supplies, new uniforms. I ask you, not as your daughter, but as the mother of your grandchildren, to consider helping us. Just this once. Just this once. The same words she had used dozens of times before. Just this once. turned into just one more time, and another, until nothing was left. I tore up the letter without replying. 2 months later, I heard from Audrey that Faith had gotten a part-time job as a receptionist at a dental office, that Grant had finally started selling insurance more seriously, compelled by real necessity rather than vague ambition, that they were slowly learning to live with what they had instead of with what they hoped to inherit. "Do you think she'll ever apologize?" Audrey asked me. "I don't know. And honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't need her apology to live in peace. I found that peace alone, without expecting anything from anyone." On my 71st birthday, Audrey organized a small celebration in my apartment. Brenda and 3 other friends from the building came. We ate chocolate cake, drank wine, and laughed, recalling our legal and family battles like old warriors, comparing scars from old wars. "To us," Brenda toasted, raising her glass. "To the women who refused to be invisible, who fought for what was theirs, who chose dignity over comfort." "To us," we all repeated. That night, alone in my apartment, I stood in front of the window looking at the city lights. 71 years old. 43 years since I was widowed. 70 years of learning that true love is not shown with pretty words, but with real respect. That family is not who shares your blood, but who respects your decisions. That growing old doesn't mean becoming invisible or incapable, but accumulating enough wisdom to know when to protect yourself. I thought about the house I built, the bricks I laid one by one, the walls that watched my daughter grow up. I thought about how I had feared losing it, how that fear almost paralyzed me. And I thought about how, in the end, losing it was what saved me. Because I discovered that what really mattered wasn't in those walls. It was in me, in my capacity to get up one more time, in my determination not to let anyone, not even my own blood, strip me of my dignity. I touched the cold glass of the window with my fingers. 71 years old, and I was just learning to live for myself. It wasn't too late. It's never too late to choose your own peace. My phone rang. It was a message from Audrey with a photograph of my grandchildren. Beautiful, smiling, oblivious to all the battles that had been fought in their name. Maybe one day when they were older, they would understand. Maybe they would come looking for me and I would tell them this story. I would teach them that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until you disappear. Or maybe not. Maybe this story would end here, in this apartment, with a 71-year-old woman looking out the window, holding a glass of wine, feeling freer than she had felt in decades. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.